I'm Briar Kensington. And the first laugh landed before the waiter set down the bread. My sister tilted her champagne flute toward the chandelier, catching light on her new ring like she was signaling a lighthouse. Briar does admin, Vanessa sang, a sugar-sweet barb that made our mother smile, and our father clear his throat as if agreement. Could be polite. The room smelled like butter and ocean, Manhattan oysters, lemon, cold air every time the maitre d' opened the door. I folded my napkin across my lap and stared at the salt crystals on the rim of my glass, counting them instead of the stairs. Across the table, Ethan Cole, her fiancé, watched me without practiced boredom I knew so well. Admin, Vanessa repeated, resting her chin on his shoulder. Spreadsheets and paper clips. She laughed. Others followed, the kind of laughter that tests how much of you is left when people think you're small. Ethan lifted his glass but didn't drink. What do you actually do, Briar? His voice was curious, like he'd noticed the part of the painting everyone else walked past. I set my water down so it wouldn't ring the crystal. I make decisions, I said, meeting his eyes, the kind people prefer to notice after they're done. A ripple passed through the table, the brief confusion that comes when a script doesn't read as expected. My mother reached for the bread basket. Vanessa rolled her eyes and launched back into seating charts, beaches, a dress with French seams. The waiter leaned in to ask about entrees. I ordered halibut and felt the small, familiar click inside me, the one that turns noise into distance. It wasn't anger. It was the hour before a storm, the way the air changes. No one knew the forecast had shifted. The first time I realized my family had already chosen their favorite, I was 9. Vanessa had spilled grape juice on our mother's silk scarf, and when the stain spread into a purple blossom, it was my name that was called. Briar, you should have been watching her. I stood there, small fists balled at my sides, wondering how I was meant to guard a sister only a year younger than me, wondering why no one cared that she'd laughed as she tipped the glass. That pattern never faded. By the time we were teenagers, our father praised Vanessa's every piano recital, even when she missed notes, while my debate trophies collected dust in the hallway cabinet. Our mother hung Vanessa's portraits, glossy images from early modeling gigs, along the staircase. My certificates, if they made it out of the drawer, ended up in the study under a pile of old mail. At birthdays and Christmas dinners, the bias became sharper, dressed up as banter. Vanessa is our dreamer, my mother would say, touching her pearls. And Briar? Well, she's practical. Practical was code for plain, safe, forgettable. I smiled through it, the same way I learned to carry trays of hors d'oeuvres at family parties, while Vanessa posed with guests, her laughter louder than the music. One Thanksgiving, I'd baked an apple pie from scratch, the crust golden, the filling warm with cinnamon. Vanessa arrived late carrying a store-bought cake in a glossy box. Everyone reached for her cake first. My father declared it delightful, though it was still half frozen in the center. I remember staring at the untouched pie, the steam fading until it looked cold and tired, much like I felt. It wasn't only food or gifts. It was the invisible hierarchy at every gathering. Vanessa sat at the center of the table, glowing with approval. I hovered at the edges, asked to pour wine, clear plates, run errands. No one questioned why she never lifted a finger. It was simply expected that I would. But beneath the weight of those small humiliations, a seed of silence grew. I learned to stop expecting applause. Instead, I built a private world of notebooks, plans, ideas that no one cared to ask about. If I spoke of ambition, it was brushed off as too serious or not fun. So I stopped sharing. What they didn't see, what they never tried to see, was that every dismissal pushed me further, inward, toward a place where I didn't need their validation. They thought they were defining me as the background sister, the reliable one. In truth, they were hardening something they couldn't name. And in that silence, in the shadow where they left me, I started to shape the person who would one day make them pause mid-laughter and wonder what they'd missed. By the time Vanessa turned 21, the small cuts had become routine, so ingrained that even she didn't notice when she twisted the knife. She borrowed my car for a photo shoot one summer morning, leaving me stranded outside my apartment in the sticky July heat. When she finally returned, the tank was empty. a lipstick print smeared on the visor, and she laughed when I frowned at the coffee stain blooming across the passenger seat. "Relax, Briar. It's just a Toyota." I was late that day, 40 minutes late, to a meeting that decided the future of a project I had been building for months. No one at home asked how it went. Vanessa only wanted to know if I could lend her my jacket for cocktails that evening. Christmas wasn't kinder. Vanessa unwrapped a designer bag from our parents, the leather still gleaming under the tree lights. From Ethan, even then just her boyfriend, came a necklace that sparkled like it had its own power source. I opened my box to find a planner, plain black leather, neat little corners. Vanessa snorted so loudly that the cousins giggled with her. "A planner? God, Briar, your whole personality is office supplies." I remember tracing the embossed initials on the cover, whispering, "It's perfect," though no one heard me. They didn't know that inside those blank pages, I would chart the first outlines of something none of them could imagine. Her entitlement grew bolder as the wedding plans consumed her life. At 2 a.m, she called, slurring words after a party, insisting I rewrite her resume for a magazine feature. "You're good with that admin stuff," she said. When I reminded her I had an early meeting, she snapped, "It's not like your job matters." So I stayed up until dawn, reshaping her resume while my presentation slides blinked on another screen. That same day, fueled by nothing but coffee, I stood before a boardroom and outlined a strategy that would change the direction of our entire fund. By the time she texted me later to say thanks, no emoji, no warmth, the deal was already moving forward. The bridal shower should have been a bridge, a chance to find laughter together. Instead, Vanessa announced to her friends, "Briar can handle the decorations and cleanup. She's amazing at organizing papers." Laughter spilled around the room as I adjusted the flower centerpieces, nodding politely, even as I balanced acquisition documents worth millions on my phone. Each moment chipped away at something fragile, but also sharpened me. They thought they were keeping me small. What they were really doing was giving me reason after reason to step out of their frame, to build something that didn't need their spotlight. And yet, despite every slight, I kept showing up. Maybe out of duty. Maybe out of hope that one day they'd see me clearly. What I didn't know then was that the moment of clarity was already on the horizon, waiting for the right dinner, the right question, the right silence to crack everything open. The truth of who I was never lived at that dinner table. It lived in the quiet hours, the ones no one in my family bothered to imagine for me. They assumed I went home to a bland apartment, microwave dinners, and piles of paperwork. What they never saw was the skyline outside my office window at midnight, Manhattan glowing like circuitry, while I studied contracts and market reports until my eyes blurred. I had spent nearly a decade climbing in finance, starting as an analyst where no one knew my name. I learned to sit quietly in conference rooms filled with men twice my age, absorbing the language of leverage, valuations, and exit strategies. While Vanessa polished her smile for photo shoots, I polished presentations that convinced billion-dollar investors to bet on emerging technologies. It wasn't glamorous, not in the way her world was, but it was power. Quiet, precise, undeniable. 3 years earlier, when the chance came to form my own fund, I signed the papers without telling my family. I named it Hartwell Capital, after a small street where I'd rented my first apartment with peeling paint and too thin walls. That apartment had been a reminder that beginnings don't predict endings, and I wanted that memory etched into every decision I made. I built a team who believed in the same silence I did, work that spoke louder than noise. We specialized in health tech startups, the kind of companies that could change how hospitals treated patients, how families afforded care. While my parents sighed at my unimportant job, I was negotiating across oceans, arranging partnerships in Singapore, Berlin, Toronto. There were clues, if anyone had cared to look. The sleek card in my wallet, plain except for my name. The calls I excused myself to take during family dinners. Conversations in clipped language about due diligence or regulatory approval. To them, it was always some friend or maybe a boyfriend I was being secretive about. No one ever leaned closer. No one ever asked. Sometimes I wondered if I should tell them. Then I'd remember the planner under the Christmas tree. The mocking laughter. The eye rolls when I said I had to work. Why hand them pieces of myself when they'd only twist them into jokes? so I kept the truth close, letting their dismissal become a shield. Every time they reduced me to admin, I thought of the numbers on my laptop screen, the signatures waiting for my approval, the lives that would be changed by the investments we made. They didn't know it, but each sneer pushed me further into the fortress I was building, and by the time Vanessa's engagement dinner arrived, that fortress was nearly unshakable. All it needed was a spark, a single question, to reveal itself. The night before Vanessa's engagement dinner, I came home to find my closet door open. Hangers swung empty where my dress should have been. A black silk sheath, simple but elegant. I had chosen it weeks earlier, knowing it was understated enough for me, but still worthy of the kind of restaurant Vanessa insisted on. When she returned it hours later, the dress smelled faintly of perfume and carried a deep red wine stain across the sleeve. She dropped it on my bed without apology. "You wouldn't have worn it anyway," she said, flipping her hair like the matter was settled. "Not like you get invited to important events." I held the fabric in my hands, the stain blooming like an accusation. There was a time I would have cried quietly, hoping she'd notice and feel guilty. Now, I only folded it carefully, set it aside, and reached for another dress. Navy blue, tailored, the one I had worn the day I signed the Hartwell Meditech deal. It wasn't glamorous, but it carried weight no one else in my family could see. That evening, while Vanessa rehearsed her smiles and practiced saying fiancé like a crown jewel, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing emails from my executive team. Numbers scrolled across my screen. Projections, regulatory approvals, a press release draft with my name at the bottom. Every line felt like a lifeline to the version of myself I had built from scratch. The contrast was almost comical. In one room, my sister polishing an image for a crowd that already adored her. In another, me polishing strategy that would ripple through global markets by Monday morning. I closed my laptop around midnight and set my phone to charge. A message buzzed in just before the screen went dark. From Jonathan, my head of strategy. "Terms locked. We're ready for announcement." I exhaled slowly. The way you do before stepping into cold air? Tomorrow wasn't about Vanessa's ring or her curated future. Tomorrow was about the truth no one in my family had cared to ask for. As I hung the navy dress on the back of my chair, I realized something. I wasn't nervous. I was steady. Whatever came next, I was ready to let the silence break. The restaurant Vanessa had chosen was the kind of place where the waiters moved like shadows, refilling glasses before they were half empty and gliding away as if they'd never been there. Crystal chandeliers threw shards of light across the white tablecloths, and every laugh at our table seemed to echo a little louder than it should have. Vanessa basked in it. She introduced Ethan to every cousin, every family friend, her hand flashing the diamond ring like a beacon. "He's in finance," she'd whisper loudly enough for the whole table. "Very well connected." Every gesture was rehearsed, every moment an advertisement for her own life. I sat 2 seats down, smoothing the navy dress across my lap, watching. My mother leaned over with her habitual smile, the one that hovered between pride and pity. "Not everyone can be ambitious." "Briar," she murmured, almost like she was offering comfort. I pressed my fork against the plate to keep from answering. When conversation turned to careers, Vanessa became the family's spokesperson. "Dad's a surgeon. Mom runs her gallery. I'm in fashion, of course." She tilted her chin toward me, her voice thick with amusement. "And Briar? She does admin work. She's always been the practical one." The laughter was polite, but it still cut. I felt the heat crawl up my neck as I stared at the untouched appetizer in front of me. For a heartbeat, it was the same old script, the same small humiliations. Then Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady, not mocking. "What do you actually do, Briar?" he asked. The table stilled, forks suspended, wine glasses frozen mid-air. I placed my fork carefully on the edge of the plate so it wouldn't clink. "Strategy," I said simply. "Investment strategy." For a moment, silence pressed in. Then conversation resumed, but softer, glances flicking back toward me, as though my single word had unsettled the choreography of the evening. Ethan's father, seated across from me, narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. The rhythm of the dinner had shifted. They didn't know it yet, but the storm had begun to gather. By the time entrees were cleared, the air around the table felt different. Vanessa was still chattering about destination weddings. Bali? maybe Capri, but her voice skimmed the surface now, trying to reclaim the spotlight. I sipped my wine and let the silence between her words widen. Ethan's father, a man whose name carried weight in the financial press, leaned slightly toward me. "Hartwell Capital," he said quietly, as though testing the sound. "That's your office, isn't it? In the tower on Lexington?" My knife paused against porcelain. I met his gaze, calm, measured. "We moved in 2 years ago. The view's remarkable." His eyes widened just enough for me to notice. Then, louder, for the whole table to hear. "Ethan, did you know Breyer is with Hartwell?" The laughter died. Vanessa's smile froze, stretched too tight. "She's joking," she said quickly, her hand tightening on Ethan's arm. "Breyer does admin work downtown." But Ethan's father pressed on, his voice cutting through the room. "No, she isn't joking." He studied me, searching for confirmation. "You founded Hartwell, didn't you?" I set my fork down deliberately. "Yes," I said. "I did!" Gasps rippled around the table, small intakes of breath like glass breaking. Ethan blinked, his composure faltering for the first time. "Hartwell just closed the Meditech acquisition," he whispered. "That was you?" I nodded once. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. My father's jaw slackened, the practiced smile gone. Vanessa's face drained of color, her diamond ring suddenly a trinket compared to the weight of my words. For years, they had dismissed me with a single phrase: admin, practical, boring. Tonight, that word was replaced with another: founder. Around us, waiters carried on with quiet efficiency, unaware that an entire family's understanding had shifted in a single breath. I leaned back in my chair, steady. "That paperwork you've all been laughing about," I said softly, my eyes on Vanessa, "is the work that built Hartwell Capital, and Hartwell now manages over $12 billion in assets." The silence that followed was louder than any applause I'd ever imagined. When the final plates were cleared and the last bottle of wine emptied, the evening no longer belonged to Vanessa. Conversations that once orbited around her ring and her wedding now revolved around me. Questions about market strategies, global partnerships, the logic behind our acquisitions. My father leaned forward, hanging on words he'd never asked me to speak before. My mother, suddenly flustered, whispered to a neighbor at another table, "That's my daughter." The CEO. Vanessa sat rigid, the color gone from her cheeks, her laughter a faint echo swallowed by silence. I didn't gloat, I only answered calmly, as if I had been waiting years not to be noticed, but to finally be seen. For once, their validation didn't matter. The truth had already shifted the room. Outside, waiting for the valet, Vanessa tugged at my arm. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she demanded, her voice sharp and trembling. I met her eyes steadily. "Because you never asked. You were too busy telling the world who you thought I was." Her lips parted, but no words came. Behind us, headlights swept across the pavement, and my car pulled forward. Not the battered Toyota she once mocked, but a black Mercedes. Her eyes flicked to it, wide with the realization that the sister she had dismissed was not the shadow she believed. As I slid into the driver's seat, she tried again. "You'll speak at the wedding, won't you? I want everyone to know you're—" I smiled faintly, closing the door. "I have a board meeting in Tokyo that week. Some admin work I can't miss." The engine purred to life, and as I drove into the night, I felt a calm I'd never known at any family gathering. For years, I thought I needed their recognition, but the truth was simpler. The empire I'd built spoke louder than their dismissals ever could. Success doesn't always enter with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives quietly, takes a seat at the table, and leaves the room forever changed.